All right, we've got a lot to get into today. We're going to unpack something really critical. A story about a profession that's meant to help people, but, well, the source material argues it has this long, complicated, and sometimes really harmful history. We're talking about psychology itself, and a system that's basically on trial.
But to really get a handle on this system, we have to start with the human cost. This isn't just some abstract debate, right? This is a story about a real child and what happens when the very systems designed to support him end up failing him instead.
And that failure, well, a lot of the time, it looks like this. Punishment exactly where there should have been support. So, we're going to start by looking at this one really personal case study that the reporting uses to make this crisis, well, painfully real.
So let's talk about Lewis. The reports are really clear. He's a bright kid, high average cognitive ability. The potential is absolutely there. But, and this is key, he also has specific learning difficulties. He needs help to unlock all that potential. And this is where a really crucial concept from the source material comes in: adultification. Basically, the school didn't see a kid who was struggling to learn. Instead, they saw his behavior through this really damaging lens. His cries for help? They were seen as aggression, as a threat. So what happens when you see a child's needs as a threat? In just one school term, Lewis got 4 suspensions. And on top of that, 8 detentions. Think about that. All of this punishment, while the actual root cause of his behavior, his learning difficulties, was being completely ignored. It was all punitive, no support.
And this brings us right to the heart of the whole issue. It's the profoundly uncomfortable question that the source material keeps coming back to. If Lewis was white, would the school have seen him differently? Would he have gotten help instead of punishment? And that's the question that takes us from one child's story to a look at the entire system. Okay, so let's pull back from Lewis's individual story for a minute and look at the bigger picture, at the machinery that the reports say created this situation in the first place. We need to understand what they call the systemic cogs.
Yeah, systemic cogs, it's a key metaphor from the research, and it's a great way to think about it. You've got all these different parts: policy, institutional bias, a lack of racial awareness, and they aren't just acting on their own. They're like these interlocking gears in a machine. And that machine, often without anyone even meaning for it to, ends up enabling and even hiding the exclusion of Black children like Lewis.
And this brings us to a huge dilemma, one faced by the very people who are supposed to be helping, the educational psychologists. On one side, you have what one source, Dr. Shungu Magadza, calls the nice professional. This is the person who prioritizes having a smooth relationship with the school, who avoids rocking the boat. But the material argues that silence can actually become complicity. And on the other side, you have the anti-racist advocate who is willing to challenge the system, to ask those hard questions, because for them, the child's needs always come first. And look, this whole dilemma is playing out inside a special educational needs system that's described as being pretty much in a state of collapse. The data here is, well, it's stark. The demand for support plans, up 91%. And check out this second bar, the number of parents who are so desperate they're taking local authorities to court, to a legal tribunal. That has exploded by 250%. That tells you the system isn't just creaking under the strain, it is profoundly failing families. But to really understand how we got to this point, we have to dig even deeper. We have to look beyond the education system and into the very foundations of psychology itself, because the research suggests this problem is rooted right in the profession's origins. This timeline, wow, it lays out a really disturbing legacy. Let's start back in the late 1800s. The very first president of the American Psychological Association, a man named Granville Stanley Hall, was openly calling Black people members of adolescent races. Fast forward to 1916. Another APA president, Lewis Terman, develops the Stanford-Binet IQ test, which then becomes a tool used to justify racial segregation. And you might think, okay, that was a long time ago. But this kind of thinking didn't just vanish. As recently as 1994, a huge bestseller, The Bell Curve, was published, arguing that Black people are genetically less intelligent. And in case you think that's an exaggeration of what they believed, just read this quote. This is directly from Lewis Terman, again, one of the founding fathers of educational psychology. He's not mincing words here. He's stating, as if it's a scientific fact, that the dullness he sees in some children seems to be racial. I mean, it's just a shocking look at the ideas that were baked into this profession right from the very beginning. So, okay, that's the history. But what about today? The reporting is pretty clear on this, that history isn't just history. It's still fueling a huge battle for the soul of the profession today, and it all centers around this powerful, and some would say dangerous idea, the myth of neutrality. You see, there's a big push from some within the field that psychology should stay out of politics. This quote here, which is common feedback the main professional magazine gets, kind of says it all. What's with all the politics? Stick to the science. The argument is that psychology should just hide behind science and evidence-based practice and not get tangled up in messy social issues. But then, in 2021, something pretty remarkable happened. The single largest professional organization for psychologists in the US, they made a really stunning admission. That's right, the American Psychological Association, the APA, issued a historic apology. And they didn't just say, oops, we made some mistakes. They formally apologized for their long history of contributing to systemic racism. They apologized for the harm caused by what they did and what they failed to do. And they apologized for promoting the very idea of a human hierarchy. This was a massive moment. But, an apology is one thing. It doesn't magically erase the system. The source material shows that resistance to change is still very real, but it often shows up in these subtle, polite ways, through something called gatekeeping. And this is where the personal story of Dr. Shungum Agadza becomes so important to understand. So here's what happened. Dr. Magadza, a Black psychologist with decades of experience, mind you, tries to get her new book on the official reading list. And this is the response she gets. Her work was dismissed because it was self-published and not from more traditional publishers. It had nothing to do with the quality of the work itself. The message was loud and clear. Your work isn't seen as legitimate unless it comes through the traditional channels, the very channels that have historically shut out voices just like hers. It's systemic exclusion, just dressed up in polite, professional language. Okay, so if the past is this deeply embedded and the present is still full of this kind of resistance, where on earth do we go from here? Well, the material doesn't just point out the problems. It actually proposes a solution. And it's not just talking about reform. It's a call for a revolution. And the core of that revolution is this idea: decolonizing psychology. So what does that actually mean? It means making a fundamental shift. Instead of just focusing on diagnosing what might be wrong with an individual person, it means you have to look at their entire environment, their social, political, and economic world, and see how that's affecting their mental health. It's this radical idea that true mental health requires a just environment. In other words, justice itself is therapeutic. And that big idea isn't just theoretical. It translates into a pretty concrete blueprint for change. Step 1. Stop using passive, safe words like inclusion and move to active anti-racism. Step 2. Make anti-racism training mandatory for all education professionals. Step 3. Put real, ring-fenced funding into early intervention and support so it can't be cut. And Step 4. Actually hold schools and local authorities accountable when they fail a child. Which brings us right back to where we started, into the final provocative question that the source material leaves us with. After seeing everything we've seen, from Lewis's personal story all the way back to the racist roots of the profession, is it really enough to just tinker with the cogs of a machine that might be fundamentally broken? Or is it time for something much bigger? Is it time for a revolution? That's the question that challenges not just the profession, but all of us to really think about what kind of future we want to build.